You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 145. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action today. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and I'm excited to share my stories and life lessons with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac. Today's episode is extra special to me because my guest is also extra special, and that is by no slight definition. Shana Pereira is nothing short of a miracle. She is the living recipient of a kidney and heart transplant after having flatlined for 2 minutes. Shana is sharing her entire journey of how this came to happen and what it was like to flatline for 2 minutes. Shana shares what that entire journey was like, what needs to be done to find a donor, how it took almost 2 years to find a donor instead of a normal 6 months because of COVID, how a kidney transplant is looked at as elective surgery. Let that sink in for a moment. She needed a kidney and it's considered elective. You'll hear me get heated up on that one too. But Shana's journey is nothing short of amazing. Shana not only shares her story with a calmness in her voice, but with a kindness that is truly unlike any other. And you'll hear that firsthand from her. I want you to please listen to the entire episode. It's a longer one than usual, but at the very end, we have an ask for you. And it's around kidney donation because Shana needs a new one. You see, the kidney that was transplanted into Shana came damaged, but it was one of those better off having one than nothing at all. And so now it's come to the point in which she needs another kidney from a living donor. You'll hear at the end of how that all works, what it's like to try to find a donor, what the donor needs to do on their end. And I ask questions from a standpoint of not knowing any of this because it's all completely new to me. Get ready to hear one of the most miraculous health journeys of your life and get to meet one of the kindest, most loving and calm, gracious people, Shana Pereira. Hi, Shana.
Hello, how are you?
I'm so good. I love hearing. Say that again. Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I love it.
Thank you.
I'm so good. And I do love your voice and your accent. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to everyone and where you're actually from? Because it took me a long time to figure it out.
Yeah, no problem. Well, my name is Shana Pereira and I am from Darwin, Australia. And Darwin is a small outback town. It's probably not as small as it was when I was born there in 1980. But it is one of the smaller cities of Australia, and it's right at the very top. It's actually really, really close to the equator. And so it's the tropics. I was born in the tropics, and the tropics and the outback is sort of the melding of how you would describe my hometown in Australia.
That sounds lovely. So how did you end up in California?
Yeah, so I saw a newspaper ad back in 2002 that said live and work in Los Angeles, representing the tourism board for my home state, which was at Australia's outback. And I thought, there's no way that this is real. I'd never been to Los Angeles before or America. It wasn't necessarily on my bucket list as like a place that I wanted to move or anything like that. And something drew me to the job posting, which I can't even really explain it today, to be honest. And in the job interview, they asked me, why would Americans want to go to the Australian outback when there was so many different terrains in the US, like the Grand Canyon and Sedona and all the national parks and all the amazing landscape that we have here in the US? Why would they want to fly all the way to Australia for it? And I said, well, because it's the real outback. And little did I know at the time that was their tagline.
That's so perfect.
I know. So I got the job.
Oh, I love it. And so much has happened since then. I want to get into your personal story, your health story, because it's so important. It's so miraculous. And I think the whole world needs to hear about it, to hear about you, what you've been through, and how you've come out on the other side. So, can we talk a bit about your health journey? That's what I'll call it.
Yeah, for sure. So, in 2015, I'd actually gone on a trip back home to celebrate the fact that I'd been working tirelessly through my advertising career here in the States. And I wanted to take a break. I was feeling burnt out and I just wanted to take a vacation. And so I went home, and the plan was to be there for 3 weeks over Christmas. And Christmas Eve 2015, I found out that my kidneys were failing. And so I ended up in hospital on Christmas Eve, in the hospital in which I was born, in my hometown. And my first thought was, wow, I've ventured out of my hometown when I was 22 years old. I didn't know anybody. I'd never been to the US. I moved with $500 and I was gonna set up life here. I obviously had the job, but it was an internship. And so I came over really knowing no one, and I'd gone through this journey in my career that then had me all the way back to I'm in hospital in my hometown, Christmas Eve 2015. And I'm like, there's no way that I'm going to die here. After this whole journey, I come all the way back here to go back to where I began. This cannot be it. And so that's when I found out my kidneys were failing. Um, Thankfully, I was surrounded by my family at the time. And yeah, that's kind of where my health journey started.
And then you were allowed to go back home to, well, your new home to the States, even with failing kidneys. That's all possible, obviously possible, but that was okay with the doctors?
Yeah, it had to be because I really lived here. At that point, I had been in the States for 13 years, and America was my home, still is. And I'd become a US citizen and everything. So that wasn't even a question coming home. Um, when I got back, I realized I don't have a primary care doctor. And the doctor had asked me at the time, um, I remember it clear as day. He said, do you feel tired? And I was like, yeah, I'm in advertising. And he goes, does your back hurt? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in advertising. Like, what are you talking about? I thought these things were normal. I thought it was normal to feel tired because I thought I was burnt out. And I thought it was normal to have lower back pain because I sit on my computer all day. And so these things to me felt they didn't feel weird or out of place. And
That's a
so,
good lesson for all of us to listen more to our bodies.
yeah, well, that's really what happened was when I got back, I'd asked myself, well, how come I didn't go to the doctor? I hadn't been and gotten a full physical in forever. I hadn't done any of those things. And I realized it was because I just hated the doctor's office. The smell, the structure, the building was old. My doctor was kind of, normal. Like, I say normal. I mean, as in, they weren't
A
anyone.
negative normal. It was a doctor. It wasn't somebody
Yeah,
fun or out of the
exactly.
ordinary.
Exactly. They were just doing normal doctor stuff, never really told me anything major other than, other than what you would expect from a doctor. Like, I have a cold. What do I take? Well, see how you feel in a week and come back to me. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And so, what was the reason behind the kidney failure? Is that something that you can figure out, or did this just happen?
Yeah, so it was a couple of things. High blood pressure was a big deterministic factor, I think. They've said, part of it is hereditary in the sense of just the mechanics of my body, if you will. Um, so yeah, I think it was really a mix of just sort of the perfect storm of all of these components.
So, you come back to the States, you go back to your doctor, and then what happens?
I didn't actually. I decided that I was going to rebuild a team from scratch. And at this point, that's what had become my mastery, was building teams. And so that's what I launched into, was like, I need to build a team of doctors around me. And one of the things that I yell from the rooftops is about One Medical, where I saw a Facebook ad, and I'm in digital marketing. And so I pay attention to advertising that comes in social media and, on YouTube and that kind of thing. And I saw an ad pop up in my newsfeed randomly that was about One Medical. And their doctor's offices they smell amazing. They had fruit infused water in the waiting rooms. You could book all the appointments on the app. And it was very modern, is the
It's like a
energy
day
that.
spa.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, this is like a day spa. And so I called and I said, I'm looking for a doctor that does this, 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 and this. And they were 360-degree view of taking care of a person, not just medical, but all aspects. And the doctor that I got paired up with, again, randomly in air quotes, was Dr. Jackie Yaris. And she said, you occur to me as someone that has taken care of a lot of people and a lot of things, is used to doing things by themselves and really taking care of a lot. You're very independent. And she said, now it's our turn to get a team around you to take care of you. And I
Mm.
was expecting her to give me this big guilt trip. And instead, she said, you didn't choose your body. And she said, you didn't choose your body. You didn't have a choice in that. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your lineage. You didn't choose any of this. And sure, could you have taken care of your body better? Yes, but it's still a body that you've started with. And so she said, now we're going to take care of you, and we're going to take care of your body in a nuanced way in which your body needs it. So,
That's
like,
beautiful.
yeah, it was like certain medications don't work for my body like they do for others. Certain things, the doctors are like, wow, that sped up really quickly. And I don't know why. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but it did. But that's okay. We got to handle it in a different way. And so that really was a principle that I took on board and built a team of specialists around me. Within 48 hours, she booked a whole bunch of appointments for me to see all the different specialists that were required. And that's where we started to build out the team. The other thing is, I had started an intern program with Loyola Marymount University, where we supported 5 different nonprofits within the class that I was teaching around digital marketing. And one of the nonprofits was the Kidney Foundation, the National Kidney Foundation. And this was 2 years earlier. And so I called the head of the National Kidney Foundation and said, this is what's happening for me. Can you help me? And she was able to give me a lot more insight into the fragility of a kidney and how it is a silent killer and how a lot of people don't know that they're dealing with the kidney issues at all. And I was able to remove any kind of remorse or guilt or any of that we sometimes carry around unnecessarily about just dealing with what I had in front of me. And so those two people really, really helped me. They connected me with amazing doctors that then kicked off a process of me finding who was right for me, not just the masters in each of their fields, but those that actually matched my values and my sentiment, my communication style, my energy, my vibe, those that just got me, that I felt understood and I felt like I was in the right place. That was a huge part of what I learned in the process.
And it feels like all the stars just aligned. And I know that this happens to you all the time in your life, but it's like you're just in the right place at the right time, talking to the right person, and it all just comes together. I think that happens more often than we realize or recognize for many, but it's very obvious that this was happening to you during this time.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. It does happen a lot for me. But I would say from a young age, I learned how to notice it and not dismiss it. So often we let our resignation overpower those things. And we think like, oh, it was just a coincidence, or, well, it wouldn't have happened if this and that and that, or, well, I was just lucky. And it's like, no, maybe the world and the universe is actually taking care of you. But when acknowledged correctly and when you're able to see the purpose in it, I mean, some of the stuff is super random. Like, who knew that one of the nonprofits that I would have helped 2 years ago would be something I would need?
Right.
So,
and that you would then have the power to call the highest person up of that nonprofit. I mean, that's a miracle in itself.
Yeah. And the fact that I'd taken the time to build a relationship with her, not just like, oh, we've made you some money, so here you go. I've really taken the time to understand her challenges at the National Kidney Foundation and understand how this group of students at Loyola Marymount could really support and help her. And we launched a bunch of Google ads on their behalf that helped people sign up for their walks and, donate and you just really support in general. And give them a new lens into digital marketing that they didn't have before. So just the fact that she was willing to help me from that standpoint, it's probably two things that I have treasured, to your point, in the sense of like really acknowledging the synchronicities and then acknowledging different people around me of you never know what you're going to learn and from who.
Right.
And I think those are two things that we don't place enough emphasis on, or that we find that life gets us too busy for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that. And then at some point you're told you need to have a kidney transplant and find a donor.
Yes. So all of that happened in that same month, was you've got to get a nephrologist. And by the way, you're going to need a kidney transplant. And so that happened early 2016. By 2017, I was on dialysis, which was extremely tough for me. And again, my body being unique and special, some things worked, some things didn't. Dialysis was a tough journey in the sense of just finding the right combination for my body. I'm allergic to heparin, as an example, we found out, which is a blood thinner, which is very necessary for dialysis.
Oh, minor detail.
I know. The doctor was like, oh, how? I'm like, I don't know. We had to find an alternative for that, which is like, 1 in 100 people. So, There was a lot of decisions I had to make. And thankfully, I was very closely connected with my nephrologist, still am. His name's Dr. Rami Hanna. And the trait that he has that is really amazing, he's a human being first. And the fact that he has a level of empathy and a desire to help and support people beyond. He was one of the doctors that continued his face-to-face responsibilities throughout COVID, moved his family out of the house so that he could go to work and come home and wouldn't be putting any of them at risk for that initial time period in which COVID was really dangerous, because his patients really do he really rates them very highly, and they're a very high priority for him. And that's a value that all of my doctors have. And so we partnered up and we went through the dialysis process while I was looking for a living donor. I was on the list, which was cumbersome at best. Just the process of getting listed for to get a kidney transplant is tedious and lengthy. And so he supported me through that entire process. Cedars-Sinai was amazing. And that took us all the way to September 2020.
And you found a donor. How was the initial donor found? Because I love this story.
Yeah, so a friend of mine, he did a podcast, and his name is Sebastian. And Sebastian had made a pledge that he was going to talk about me every time he did a public speaking engagement, which he made good on, which was amazing. He is all about doing kind things for others, and that's his expression. And he was doing a podcast that a lady named Katie was listening to at the time. And she called me out of the blue and said, I feel like I am to give you my kidney. And she was very resolved on the fact that she was going to be my kidney donor. And she went through all the testing. The testing got delayed because of COVID, because kidney transplants are an elective surgery, if you can believe that.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. It still is mind-boggling to me. But kidney transplants are an elective surgery.
Just like, a breast implant would be
Yes.
for, not for medical purposes, but for vanity purposes.
Right.
Yeah. And to me, there's absolutely no category. You don't have the video right now, but there was an eye roll, a head shake that went with all of this.
Yes. So Katie finally got approved at the end of August 2020, which took almost 2 years, which is a year longer than most, or a year and a half longer than most. And part of that delay was because of COVID. And in September of 2020, the doctors realized that my heart was also failing, and it was at 15% now. And that came from my body's inability to balance out the phosphorus and the calcium while I was on dialysis, which is a big issue that a lot of patients have in going through dialysis. And so that impacted my heart negatively. And that's what had happened all the way through to September 2020.
And so with your heart only at 15% capacity, what does that mean next? I know what it means next, but for the listeners, where do you go from there?
Yeah. So what that meant was I was going to need a heart and a kidney transplant. And I thought for sure I'm going to die, like for sure. At this point, I was like, it took so long to have Katie approved. Then she was finally approved. And that to me meant all the signs were pointing to that I was meant to die. You know, back when we started this conversation, I was all about synchronicities. And I thought, oh no, this really means that I'm not meant to be here. And so they did a surgery on September 20th, so September 2020, Labor Day weekend, to see if they could increase my heart rate and my heart function, which didn't work. And then it was early November when the doctors said, we are going to have to give you a heart and a kidney transplant and get you on the list for both. Because my heart was failing, then it was analyzed as, well, can she even make it through a kidney transplant? So now I'm off the list again. So that was the process there. In November, one of my best friends said, she said, this is going to be amazing because your kidneys failed on Christmas Eve 2015. I think you're going to get a heart and kidney on Christmas Day 2020. And this is going to be a Christmas miracle. And we're going to make a Christmas movie. And I'm going to get to be in it because I love Hallmark movies. And I never thought I'd ever get to play myself in one. But now I will because this is going to be amazing.
And honestly, what was your first reaction to that? Because I think I would tell my friend to go F off.
No, so funny. At that time, the movie that I was in was Final Destination. You know, when it's like the car accident doesn't kill the person, but the garbage disposal does.
Right.
Like it felt like that. And I thought to myself, my movie, I know how that ends. Her movie sounds way better. I'm going to get into her movie because her movie's got a happy ending and it sounds way better.
Mm.
And I knew at the time it was a moment of inspiration that she'll share that she doesn't know where it came from. Because as you can imagine, it's a completely different reaction than most.
Right.
This is why we're best friends, right? Because it was perfect in the sense that it gave me something to live for. Genuinely, it gave me something to live for, where I called the doctors and I said, listen, we're making a Christmas movie, so we need to hurry this whole thing up. And the doctor was like, well, it doesn't really work like that. But if anyone can do it, you can. And they obliged because I didn't realize at the time, they still comment now about how sick I was. I didn't know. I didn't realize it. I was still working every day, driving myself everywhere. I felt okay with the exception of walking a bunch and noticeably was out of breath. But I had imagined in my head, if someone was on their deathbed, that they would be like plugged into a whole bunch of tubes and laying in bed and not being able to move kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where I still felt a lot of life in me. And I think that was one of the dichotomies, that they did an amazing job of sharing with me how serious it was without it being doomed.
Right. Where it was scary, but not like scary ending.
Yeah. And they were like, look, there's lots of people in LA that are walking around with a heart and kidney transplant. And I thought, oh, is there? I thought there wasn't going to be that many. And the doctor was like, yeah, there's a bunch. I'm like, oh, okay. All right then. Like it had me feel a little bit more like, okay, this could work out. At the same time, my aunt is a Catholic nun. And I called her and I said, look, I'm really scared that I'm going to die. And she said, yeah, you might. And I said, well, what kind of a nun are you?
A realistic one? No.
Right? I'm like, what is happening? And she said, yes, you might. This is very serious. But either way, you're taken care of. So the real question is, what are you going to do with the time that you have here? Whether that be 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 months, or 10 years, or 10 decades. What are you going to do with the time that you have on earth? And that really kept me alive. It kept me alive with a sense of surrender. And I remember feeling extremely terrified. And at the same time, a certain level of peace washed over me. And that's where I kicked into, I'm going to do everything humanly possible. And then there's a point at which I surrender to the outcome being the outcome. And so that's what we did. Was the doctors moved all of my appointments forward, and they said, let's get you cleared before Christmas. And they said, it's a really long list. So you're going to have to make appointments, and you're going to have to drive up and down and do what you have to do. But, you've got this. And that's what I did. And so I made all the appointments. I found specialists to clear me. I called everybody you could think of. And it was me and my best friends and a couple of others at the time that was supporting me, that we just jumped on the phone and we started calling around and getting my appointments set up. And I got myself all the way to December 22nd. One of the last tests that I had to do was at Cedars, which was heart pressure tests. And the doctor made the decision to admit me that night. And he said, there's 2 levels that you'll go on the list of. One of them is a level 5, which means you wait for a few months at home. And one is a level 4, which means you get admitted until a heart and kidney come for you. But that still will take 6 to 8 weeks.
Mm.
And it was all dependent on the numbers that they were going to show up in those couple of days. He said, either way, it's not going to be Christmas. But you can still make the movie because you can base it loosely on facts. And I was like, who's going to watch a Hallmark movie that was made in February? Nobody, This has to be it's got to be an actual Christmas miracle to be a Christmas miracle. So they put me on the list at a level 4, and that was on Christmas Eve. And we'd done everything humanly possible at that point. And it was like, okay, well, now we pray. And the funniest part of the story was I wasn't particularly religious, or not religious at all. My family is very Catholic, hence why I have a Catholic nun, right, for an aunt. And I had been learning with her different Bible verses because I thought, if I'm going to die, I better get myself squared away just in case this whole thing is real. Like, just in case there really is a God, I better make sure I'm tightened up. Was my thought process, right? And on Christmas Eve, or the day before, I'd sent a note out on Facebook and said, no matter what religion you are or whatever your practice is, if you can send prayers, positive affirmations, thoughts, whatever your version is, manifestations, whatever your version is, I'm in hospital and we're praying for a Christmas miracle. And I also said, this is very awkward, but if you know someone who has a loved one that might be passing, that they can nominate me for to receive their organs. And if you can imagine, Michelle, I've barely asked anybody to borrow $100, let alone how do you ask for your loved one's organs,
Yeah, it's a big ask.
It's an ask. Some would say it's big, and others would say everyone, there are people out there that this is something they've wanted to do for their whole lives. Kind of like Katie, who was just called to donate a kidney
Mm-hmm.
And she knew that that was something she wanted to do. And because she didn't know me, right? Like we weren't connected other than through this event. At this point, she obviously can't donate to me now because of the fact that I needed a heart and a kidney transplant. So it has to come from a deceased donor. So that's where we were. And this was Christmas 2020 by this point. The doctor called, Cedars called, and 10:30 p.m. on Christmas Day, they said, we have a heart and a kidney for you. And the
There's your
entire
Christmas miracle.
yes, the entire floor was praying. The nurses, the other patients, everybody was praying. I had received at this point thousands of texts and pings on Facebook, and so many people had reached out just with their prayers in all different religions, which was just mind blowing for me. It was so humbling. It felt like we all wanted a Christmas miracle, frankly, because that was the year of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people weren't able to see their loved ones, and we were all isolated and disconnected from each other physically. And I was in hospital by myself. The hospital was accepting no visitors at all. So it was a really, it was a really interesting time. And I think we all wanted a miracle just to say, like, good things were still happening in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really the feeling that washed over all of us, was like, wow, this prayer thing really works. Like, this stuff actually happens. Miracles really do come true. Good things actually still happen. And that was the feeling that we all had going into surgery. And it was amazing. I remember the next day, the nurses said, they were like, listen, you're our Christmas miracle. They're going to want to take hella pictures of you. So let's make sure you look super hot for your surgery. When you come out of surgery, they're going to want to take photos. And I'm like, oh my God, that is the best. And so they braided me up. We did a little mini facial. They got me all sterilized and ready for surgery. It was a big celebration of everybody kind of coming together. And it felt really great of like, this is our Christmas miracle. And it was a Christmas present and gift for all of us in just giving us all a little more hope, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The doctors came in, the doctor, the anesthesiologist, and the cardiologist all came in to say hello and make sure I was ready for surgery. And while they were in my room, I flatlined. And that's when it became a real miracle of, if the synchronicities hadn't happened, if I hadn't gotten cleared in time, if my best friend hadn't made up, let's make a Christmas movie and let's have a Christmas miracle. If this had been any other time in the year, if I had decided, you know what, this is too much, I'm going to just do it after Christmas. If any other thing was out of order, it would have been too late. And that's when it became a real miracle. And in
Yeah.
flat,
If you hadn't been admitted.
right, if I hadn't have been admitted on December 22nd, or if my numbers had been better and they would have sent me home, little, you know, just unbeknownst to us that only a couple days later it would have deteriorated that quickly. And that's where I think, to your point, those synchronicities of the right place at the right time really came into glaring view. And when I flatlined, I had what culture calls a near-death experience. I call it a death experience because there was nothing near about it for me. I was clear that I was clinically dead for 2 minutes. And in that time frame, I remember falling asleep, and then I felt infinite blackness or infinite darkness kind of feeling, like as if I was floating out of space. And just as I was getting my bearings of like, what is happening? I remember standing in a hallway and looking down. I was kind of looking sideways at the hallway, sort of looking into it and seeing where it was going. And there was two figures, God and Jesus, and I just instantly knew who they were. There was a familiarity to the experience. I just instantly knew. And Jesus looked like a person, like I could see all of his features. I could pick him out of a lineup, as they say. God was more of a shadow. And it was like the outline of like an ancient man is the best way I can describe it. But it was a shadow. I couldn't tell you any features at all. And then there was a light behind both of them that didn't really have like a source of where it was coming from. It didn't look like daylight. Like it didn't look like an inside outside feeling. It also didn't look like it was coming from anywhere. It just was sort of there.
Mm.
And then suddenly I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. And it was a wave of compassion, a deep, deep, deep sense of compassion for just being human. It still makes me emotional to this day. The deepest sense of compassion for being a human being, for everything we go through, for all the struggles, for all the stresses, for all the joys, for everything we go through as human beings, a deep, deep level and sense of compassion. And I remember it emitting from Jesus's eyes, specifically his eyes. I felt like he could see through me. And God spoke to me in that moment. And I remember nodding and saying, okay. And then coming back through the infinite darkness. And then all of a sudden, someone's trying to wake me up. And I thought, who is trying to wake me up out of my sleep? Like, what do they want? And I opened my eyes, and it was the nurse sitting on top of me, giving me CPR on my chest. And I moved her out of my way. I said, Margaret, relax. And I sat up and I said, guys, relax. I just took a little nap. Where were we? And the doctor's eyes were bulging out of their masks. They could not believe what had just happened. Little did I know, I found out later, anyone who's flatlined for 2 minutes coming back is slim to none. Apparently doesn't happen like the movies. Who knew? And when they do, because even just because of the CPR, that them having the strength to sit up or having the cognizance to understand where they are, who they're talking to, what's happening, what time it is, all of those things are normally not readily there.
Mm-hmm.
They're groggy, they're drooling, they don't know what's happened. They're kind of foggy as to like what is going on.
Sure.
That's when they raced me into the OR and they opened my chest up. My heart was still in a helicopter coming. And so it was still 3 hours away, I believe. And so the doctors kept me alive for 3 hours, kept my heart pumping while my other heart was in a helicopter and it landed on the rooftop at Cedars. And they raced up to get it, come down, transplanted me. The minute the heart went into my body, it started working immediately. My kidney came 12, 14 hours later. And it started working immediately as well. And then I had to be raced back into surgery for one more surgery on my leg because of all the contraptions and what have you. They found a blood clot in my leg. So to race back in and remove the blood clot. And so after 3 surgeries, I came to probably 30 something hours after. And 3 days later, I was taking my first steps. And my cardiologist called back and said, he said, you don't have to make anything up in your movie. Just make it based exactly on facts every little detail exactly on facts. You don't have to make anything up. And it was just so amazing, such a sacred experience and such a set of miracles that even though it happened to me, I'm still only at sort of 80% belief in coming through that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really, and so many people involved. It was a community effort in having me be here to be able to have this conversation with you today. In particular, my donor, who was 29 years old, and she died on Christmas morning. So yeah, I really, it's a gift to be here, to be sharing the story. I feel like her life continues to live on every time I share it, in her honor, that she ticked a box at the DMV, probably when she first got her driver's license, frankly. And because of that, here I am having this conversation with you.
It's truly a miracle. You're a living, walking, breathing miracle on multiple levels.
Thank you. It's super humbling.
You're just, I adore you, and you know this, but now I get to share you with all of my listeners so they can start adoring you too and following your journey. And I know that now we need another donor. We need another kidney.
Yeah. So part of that journey, it's kind of interesting as to where I started at. When I got the kidney and heart transplant, my donor had some damage to her kidney that she didn't know about. It truly is a silent killer, in the sense that it's not something that's actively checked for unless you are asking, and or unless there's some obvious sign, which if I'm an example, I was tired, So there was some damage to her kidney, which the doctors had initially hesitated, but at the same time I was flatlining. So it was like, we have to save you. And so that kidney has been amazing. It's acted as a bridge in between. And so now I need a living donor to have another kidney transplant and get my kidney function back. And what is interesting is that we can survive with one kidney, which a lot of people don't realize.
So everybody, you all have two kidneys, and one of you might just be the match. How do they go about finding out if they're a match, and what does that process look like? Does it cost on behalf of the donor? What all goes into it?
Yeah. So the initial steps are reaching out to me and to Cedars. A lot of people, they start just by reaching out and getting information. I obviously can share a lot of the information just based on my own experience, as well as since then I've been plugged into a lot of different people that have had kidney transplants in a lot of different ways, some from deceased donors and some from living donors. So the process is basically submitting a form that says I'm interested in being a living donor for me. And then what they do initially is a blood test. And the blood tests come back with a blood type plus antibodies. And there's a few different matches that need to happen that allow for someone to be a match. And they're very, very, very specific on the process, in the sense that this is for all hospitals and all organ transplants in the US, that I'm comfortable in saying all of them, in that they are very, very specific with living donors and very diligent around not just health-wise today, but also any predictable health issues for the next couple of decades, to make sure that the person is good to donate their kidney. So there's a rigorous testing process that goes through after a person is a match in the initial blood draw, including social worker evaluations for the mental and emotional aspects, as well as the physical. It's a complete 360 review of the person and, really making sure that the person is ready to donate a kidney, not just physically, but in all aspects, which I think is really important.
Absolutely, because you don't know what to expect really in doing such a thing and having, a part of your body removed and given to someone else. It's kind of crazy to think about when, you do start talking about it and to know that person as well.
Exactly right.
And so does it cost the donor anything financially to do this? Because I imagine that's a big question for people as well, especially if someone would be ready and willing and able to donate, but they don't have the financial means of whatever it takes to be that donor. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my insurance covers the testing for living donors and then and the process for it. So any out of pocket expenses like travel to the hospital and things like that, those are the costs that are what most people, that would be the question because my insurance covers everything else. And so, really, from that standpoint, there are a couple of national programs that support living donors that do need financial assistance that can be applied for. Yeah, I've seen a lot of different people do many different ways to raise those funds. But what I've noticed more than anything is the amount of people that are willing to help and support. Um, for example, Katie, my last donor, when she came to LA to do her testing, she lives in Virginia. And so when she came to LA to do her testing, the the friend of mine, Sebastian, who'd done the podcast, he was going to be away that particular couple of weeks. And so he gave her his apartment to stay in while she went to do testing down the street, as an example, right?
Of
Like,
course he did.
yeah, it's that sort of community feeling is readily available. And, lots of people are willing to support and help the process just from being kind. Um, so, yeah, the cost for the actual transplants, though, are covered by insurance.
And you saying kind, I feel like you are just so kind. The way you speak is so kind. The way I get to work with you, so I'm very blessed. And I know how kind you are. And that really is such a great word to describe you, to describe the process, what you've done, and how you've worked with others. You're truly a kind human being. And those are sometimes rare to find these days.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. I think I give that credit back to my grandparents who were immigrants to Australia, my grandparents and my parents. And they were refugees actually from a war-torn country. And so they really kind of taught us one, they taught us resilience. Um, when I think about the people, the lives and the sacrifices that they had to make in their lives, for me to have the life that I have is tremendous. So for me, from that standpoint, I think that gives you a different lens growing up,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it gave me a different lens of just what, even just two generations, the difference that can be made. And like I say, the struggles that we all have as humans, I think we're all united and we're all connected by
Yeah.
fundamentally the same core things, that we want to be accepted, we want to be a good person, And my grandma still says, try and be a good person every day. Just try. Some days you'll win on that front. Some days you won't, right? Like some days you'll fail miserably, but your intention being there is half of the battle. And so that's what I try and practice. And I am of the mindset that if I have it and someone else doesn't, why not? There's enough to go around for all of us, in my opinion.
I love that. How can everyone find you and reach out to you? learn more about kidney donation and hopefully finding you a donor.
Thank you. The easiest way is my website, which is shanapereira.com. And I know, Michelle,
It'll be in the show notes. Yep. It'll be all spelled out for you.
thank you. That was my concern. And also on Instagram, I've realized that this journey isn't for me. Isn't just solely for me, is what I meant. I didn't, I never had on my career growth and progression that I wanted to be on podcasts or, you know, that I wanted to be talking about kidney transplants as an example. If left to my own devices a few years ago, I would have chosen to go through my kidney transplant and never have told anybody about it and moved on. But what I have recognized through this journey is that part of why it's happening is for me to actually share from a different lens, maybe some of the unique challenges that are faced in the journey of transplants and organ transplants, and also just the medical industry of how we select our doctors. Many
Mhm.
people have shared with me that that was different. The relationship that I have with my doctors is different. The way in which they relate and that I am able to, just the fact that I have a team of doctors that all talk to each other about my body is different. And that's stuff that I recognize that I maybe had a different approach that could help somebody. And so on my Instagram and my website is the place in which most people will find useful, hopefully, by way of me really sharing what it's like in real time, as well as how that can potentially make it a little easier for you or for a loved one in which you're supporting who is going through something like this.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing of yourself. And I'm going to do all I can that we can find you a living donor. We want to find someone this year, everybody. So within 2022, we're going to find you a donor for a kidney. You all have two. She just needs one.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me on. It's such a blessing.
My pleasure. Okay, friends. Now you've heard Shana's story. You know what it takes to become a kidney donor. And if you feel moved by what you heard, then I truly encourage you to go to Shana's website, look up what it takes to be a donor further from what she shared, get in touch with her if it's something that's really on your heart to consider. I think it's probably one of the most beautiful gifts that you can give someone, especially someone you don't know. But now that you've gotten to hear from Shana, you do know a bit more about her and what a beautiful person she is inside and out. Donation of anything is a big deal. I know that, whether we're talking about financially or an actual organ. So it's not spoken about lightly here at all, but it can change a life and it can save a life. So to have the power to do that is something that's absolutely incredible. I'm so grateful that Shana wants to share her story and that it all originated in sharing simply her story, nothing more than that. But here we are, and she needs a new kidney. And so it's become much more. And I know that the power of a podcast has been able to change things for her before, and it has the power to change her life once again. It has the power to change your life too. This week, as you go about your business, look for those synergies that are happening all around you. Everything is happening for a reason, including this episode. Be grateful for what you have, the body that you're living in, and the people that are surrounding you, because it's no accident that everything is happening the way it should be.